They say money changes people. But for Ethan Sterling, money didn't just change him, it blinded him. He stood in the center of that courtroom, adjusting his $5,000 suit, looking at his wife, Gabriel, like she was something he'd stepped on in the street. He had the high-powered lawyers, the hidden assets, and the arrogance of a man who has never lost. He told her she would leave their marriage with absolutely nothing. He told her she was a nobody. But Ethan made one fatal calculation. He forgot that even the quietest lamb can have a lion for a brother. What happens when the nobody you discarded turns out to be the sister of the city's most ruthless CEO? You're about to find out. This is the story of how arrogance met its match. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean, it just made the grime slicker. That was how Gabriel felt standing in the foyer of the Sterling estate on a Tuesday afternoon in October. She felt slick with the residue of a conversation that had shattered her life. "I need you out by Friday," Ethan Sterling said. He didn't even look up from his tablet. He was checking stocks. The Nikkei was down. His mood was foul. Gabriel, clutching her purse with white-knuckled desperation, stared at the back of his head. "Friday? Ethan, we've been married for 6 years. You can't just expire me like a contract." Ethan turned then. He was a handsome man, objectively. Sharp jawline, eyes the color of cold steel, the kind of face that graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune. But to Gabriel, he looked like a stranger. "A contract is exactly what this was, Gabriel," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I needed a domestic stabilizer, someone to manage the house, look good at galas, and keep the press bored. You've done that. But I'm pivoting. Jessica and I, we have a synergy you and I lack." Jessica Thorne, his 24-year-old chief of staff. Gabriel had seen the texts months ago, but had chosen silence, hoping it was a phase, hoping that the man she had nursed through a bout of pneumonia last winter, the man she had supported when his first company nearly went under, was still in there. He wasn't. "I have rights, Ethan," Gabriel whispered, her voice trembling. "I helped you build Sterling Dynamics. I managed the accounts in the early days. Ethan laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a bark of incredulity. He walked over to the mahogany desk and picked up a thick document bound in blue paper. He tossed it onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. "The prenup," Ethan sneered. "Ironclad, drafted by Arthur Blackwood himself. You get a small stipend for 6 months, and you keep your car. That's it. No alimony, no claim to the real estate, no shares in the company." "That prenup was signed under duress," Gabriel argued, tears finally spilling over. "You told me it was just a formality. You said you'd tear it up after our first anniversary." "I lied," Ethan said simply. He checked his watch, a Patek Philippe she had bought him for his 35th birthday. "Look, don't make this ugly, Gabriel. You don't have the money for a lawyer who can go up against Blackwood. Just sign the divorce papers, take the stipend, and go back to whatever it is you people do. Go be a waitress. You were good at that when I found you." He walked past her, brushing her shoulder. He smelled of expensive cologne and betrayal. At the door, he paused. "Oh, and leave the jewelry. The diamonds are company assets." As the heavy front door clicked shut, Gabriel Sterling collapsed onto the cold marble floor. She was 32 years old. She had no job history for the last 6 years, no savings of her own because Ethan insisted on joint accounts she couldn't access, and she was being evicted from the only home she knew. But as she wept, a strange clarity began to form in the back of her mind. Ethan thought she was just Gabriel, the orphan waitress he had saved from a diner in Portland. He believed the story she had told him 6 years ago. He didn't know that Gabriel was a middle name. He didn't know that her last name, before she changed it to Sterling, wasn't just Smith, as she'd claimed on their marriage license application, a clerical error she had conveniently never corrected. Her birth name was Gabriel Vance, and the Vances didn't get mad. They got even. The next 3 weeks were a blur of humiliation. Ethan was efficient. He froze the credit cards within hours. He had security escort her off the property on Friday at noon, exactly as he threatened. The neighbors, people Gabriel had hosted for dinner parties, peered through their blinds, watching the Sterling girl get tossed out like yesterday's trash. Gabriel moved into a motel on the outskirts of the city. It smelled of stale cigarettes and pine cleaner. It was a far cry from the sprawling estate in Medina, but it was quiet. She needed quiet to think. She sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring at her phone. It was a burner phone she'd bought with cash from selling a few designer handbags Ethan hadn't catalogued. She held it for a long time, her thumb hovering over a contact she hadn't called in 7 years. Julian. 7 years ago, Gabriel had walked away from the Vance family empire. She wanted to be loved for herself, not for the billions her father had made in shipping and logistics. She wanted a simple life. She had run away, changed her identity, and found Ethan. She thought Ethan loved her. She thought she had found her fairy tale. Now, she realized she had just traded one gilded cage for a much smaller, crueler one. She dialed the number. It rang once, twice. "This is a private line," a deep baritone voice answered. The voice was cold, sharp, and terrifyingly familiar. "Who is this?" Gabriel took a shaky breath. "Julian, it's Elle." There was a silence on the other end, so profound it felt like the line had gone dead. "Elle," the voice cracked, losing its steel edge instantly. "Gabriel, where the hell have you been? Dad died thinking you were—" "I know," Gabriel choked out. "I know, Jules, I'm sorry. I can't explain everything right now, but I need help." "Where are you?" The authority was back in his voice. Julian Vance, the current CEO of Vance Global, didn't ask questions. He gave orders. "Seattle, I'm in trouble, Julian. I got married." "Married?" Julian exhaled sharply. "Okay. Is he hurting you? Do I need to send a team?" "He's hurting me legally," Gabriel said, wiping her eyes. "He's divorcing me. He's taking everything. He says I'm nothing. He's using Arthur Blackwood to bury me." "Blackwood?" Julian made a noise that sounded like a dark chuckle. "A shark in a goldfish pond. Listen to me, Gabriel. Do not sign anything. Do not leave the city. I am coming to you." "No!" Gabriel panicked. "If Ethan sees you, he'll know. He'll know I have money. He'll try to sue me for fraud or try to get a settlement from me. I want him to show his true colors. I want to beat him in court on his terms, Julian. I want to see his face when he realizes he lost to the waitress." There was a pause. She could hear Julian tapping a pen against his desk, a habit he'd had since he was a teenager. "You want a spectacle?" Julian said slowly. "I want justice," Gabriel corrected. "Fine," Julian agreed. "We'll play it your way. I'll send you a lawyer, not one of our corporate sharks. That would raise red flags. I'll send someone who looks unassuming, someone Ethan will underestimate, just like he underestimated you. Thank you, Jules." "Don't thank me yet," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave. "You're a Vance, Gabriel. We don't just survive, we conquer. I'll be there for the final hearing, and God help this Ethan Sterling when I arrive." The setup. 2 days later, Gabriel met her lawyer in a diner. Sarah Jenkins looked like a frazzled librarian. She wore an oversized cardigan, thick glasses, and carried a briefcase that looked like it was falling apart. She was perfect. "Mr. Vance briefed me," Sarah said, ordering a black coffee. Her demeanor changed the moment the waitress walked away. Her eyes were razor sharp. I've specialized in contract law for 20 years, but I keep a low profile. To Ethan Sterling and Arthur Blackwood, I'm going to look like a public defender who's out of her depth. That's exactly what Ethan wants, Gabriel said. Good. We're going to let him have it. Sarah smiled, and it was a terrifying expression. We're going to let him hang himself with his own arrogance. We need to document everything, every text, every email, every threat. We are going to drag this out until the final hearing. For the next 2 months, the silent war raged. Ethan grew increasingly aggressive. He sent process servers to Gabriel's motel at 3 a.m. He had Jessica Thorne post pictures of them vacationing in Cabo on the company Instagram account, captioning them, "Finally free of the dead weight." Gabriel printed every single one. She showed up to the preliminary hearings wearing worn-out clothes. She looked tired. She let Arthur Blackwood scream at her in depositions. She stuttered on purpose. "Look at her," Ethan whispered to Jessica during one hearing, loud enough for Gabriel to hear. "She's broken. She'll sign the settlement by Monday just to buy food." Arthur Blackwood, a man who charged $200 an hour, leaned back in his chair and smirked at Sarah Jenkins. "Ms. Jenkins," he patronized, "your client is delaying the inevitable. The prenup is solid. Surrender now, and Mr. Sterling might be generous enough to cover your legal fees." Sarah Jenkins pushed her glasses up her nose. "We'll see you in court, Mr. Blackwood." The trap was set. The date for the final divorce decree and asset division was set for December 10th. Gabriel marked it on her calendar in red ink. It wasn't just the end of her marriage. It was the day the world would meet Julian Vance. The morning of December 10th was bitter cold. Inside the Superior Court of Washington, the air was stiflingly hot. Courtroom 4B was packed. Ethan Sterling had ensured that. He had leaked the hearing date to a few friendly business bloggers, framing it as the final liberation of Sterling Dynamics from a gold-digging spouse. He wanted an audience. He wanted the board of directors to see him cut the dead weight. Gabriel sat at the defendant's table. She wore a simple grey suit she'd bought at a thrift store. It was slightly too big in the shoulders, making her look frail and shrinking. Next to her, Sarah Jenkins shuffled through a stack of disorganized papers, dropping a pen, looking every bit the incompetence lawyer Ethan assumed she was. On the other side of the aisle, the atmosphere was a cocktail party. Ethan sat flanked by Arthur Blackwood and 3 junior associates. Jessica Thorne sat in the gallery directly behind him, wearing a red dress that was entirely inappropriate for court. She smirked at Gabriel, mouthing the word, "Buy." "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Harrison swept in. He was an older man with a reputation for impatience. He looked at the packed gallery and frowned. "This is a divorce hearing, not a theatre production. Keep it quiet or I'll clear the room." Arthur Blackwood stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, we represent the plaintiff, Mr. Sterling. We are here to enforce the prenuptial agreement signed 6 years ago and finalize the dissolution of marriage. This is a straightforward case that the defendant has been dragging out with frivolous delays." The judge looked at Sarah. "Ms. Jenkins, you're representing Mrs. Sterling." "Yes, Your Honor," Sarah squeaked, adjusting her glasses. We contest the validity of the prenup on the grounds of unconscionability and, lack of full disclosure." Blackwood laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. Mr. Sterling disclosed every asset. Mrs. Sterling was a waitress at Big Ed's diner when they met. She brought 0 assets into the marriage. She simply wants a payout she didn't earn." Ethan leaned back, crossing his legs. He watched Gabriel. He wanted to see her cry. He wanted her to beg. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, looking at the papers, "you are claiming that Mrs. Sterling made no significant contribution to the marriage or the company." Ethan stood up. He didn't need a lawyer for this part. He wanted to say it himself. "Your Honor, Gabriel was decorative. I tried to teach her about the business, but she lacks the pedigree and the education. She cooked meals and hosted parties. That is the extent of her value. Now that the company is expanding globally, I need a partner who understands that world. Gabriel does not." Gabriel stared at the table. She remembered the nights she stayed up until 4 a.m. helping him balance the books when his CFO quit. She remembered using her waitress savings to pay for the incorporation fees of his first subsidiary. "I see," the judge said, scribbling notes. "And you are offering no alimony?" "The prenup states 0 alimony if the marriage lasts less than 7 years, Blackwood interjected smoothly. "We are at 6 years and 11 months. The contract is clear." "It's cruel," Sarah Jenkins said, her voice shaking slightly. "My client has no home, no job, and no savings." "That sounds like a personal problem," Blackwood shot back. "Not a legal one," the gallery murmured. Even the business bloggers looked uncomfortable. It was a slaughter. "I'm inclined to agree with the plaintiff," Judge Harrison sighed, looking at the clock. "Unless the defense has substantial evidence of fraud or hidden assets, the prenup holds. Ms. Jenkins, do you have anything other than emotional appeals?" Sarah Jenkins stopped shuffling her papers. She went very still. Gabriel looked up. The tears were gone from her eyes. "Actually, Your Honor," Sarah said. Her voice had changed. The squeak was gone. It was replaced by a tone of calm, deadly precision. "We do have one motion. We would like to introduce a new witness regarding the financial status of Sterling Dynamics." Blackwood frowned. "Objection. Witness lists were finalized weeks ago." "This witness pertains to new information discovered only this morning," Sarah said. "Information regarding the hostile takeover of Mr. Sterling's primary debt obligations." Ethan froze. "Hostile takeover? Debt obligations?" "I'll allow it," the judge said, intrigued. "Who is your witness?" Sarah Jenkins smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "The defense calls Mr. Julian Vance." The name hung in the air for a second, not fully registering. Vance. In the business world, the name Vance wasn't just a name, it was an institution. Vance Global was a conglomerate that ate companies like Sterling Dynamics as a light snack. They controlled shipping lanes, logistics, tech infrastructure, and private equity. Ethan furrowed his brow. Why would someone from Vance Global be here? Then the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom groaned open. The silence that followed was absolute. 2 large men in dark suits entered first, scanning the room with professional paranoia. They stepped aside, holding the doors. Walking through them was a man who sucked the oxygen out of the room. He was tall, over 6'3", wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than Ethan's car. He didn't walk. He glided with the predatory grace of a panther. His face was hard angles and cold intelligence, his eyes hidden behind dark tint sunglasses, which he removed as he stepped into the well of the court. He looked nothing like Gabriel. Where she was soft and fair, he was dark and intense. But when his eyes swept the room and landed on her, the resemblance in their expression, the set of the jaw, was undeniable. Ethan felt a cold sweat prickle the back of his neck. He knew that face. He had seen it on the cover of Time magazine last month. Julian Vance, the CEO of Vance Global, the man known in the industry as the Reaper for how ruthlessly he dismantled his enemies. Julian didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at Ethan. He walked straight to the defense table. He stopped behind Gabriel's chair. He placed one hand on her shoulder. Gabriel reached up and covered his hand with hers. The entire courtroom gasped. The connection was intimate, familial, and shocking. "Who is this?" Judge Harrison asked, though his voice lacked its usual authority. He was staring at Julian. "Julian Vance," he said. His voice was a deep baritone that carried without effort. "I am here to represent the interests of the Vance Family Trust and to support my sister." Sister. The word hit the room like a grenade. Ethan Sterling stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "What?" Arthur Blackwood's face went white. He dropped his expensive pen. Jessica Thorne, in the back, stopped smirking. "Sister?" Ethan stammered, his composure shattering. "That's impossible. She's Gabriel Smith. She's a nobody. She's from Portland." Julian finally turned his eyes to Ethan. It was like a tiger looking at a limping gazelle. "She is Gabriel Vance," Julian said softly, but everyone heard it. "She used the name Smith to avoid parasites like you. It seems her instincts were correct." Julian walked around the table and stood in the center of the room. He didn't ask permission. He commanded the space. "Your Honor," Julian addressed the judge, "my sister chose to live a humble life. She wanted to build something real. She married this man against our father's wishes. We respected her choice. We stayed away. But when I received a call that she was being thrown out onto the street like refuse, well, the Vance family took an interest." "This is irrelevant," Blackwood shouted, trying to regain control. "Her family connections don't change the prenup. It doesn't change the assets." "Oh, but it does," Julian smiled. "Because you see, Mr. Blackwood, you've made a terrible mistake. You assumed my sister was destitute. You assumed she had no resources to fight you, so you got sloppy." Julian snapped his fingers. One of his bodyguards stepped forward and handed him a black folder. "Mr. Sterling," Julian said, turning to Ethan, "you pride yourself on being a businessman. Let's talk business." Ethan was trembling. He couldn't stop it. The power dynamic had shifted so violently, he felt nauseous. He looked at Gabriel. She wasn't shrinking anymore. She was sitting up straight, looking at him with a mix of pity and resolve. "What are you talking about?" Ethan hissed. "Sarah?" Julian nodded to the public defender. Sarah Jenkins stood up. She took off her thick glasses and tossed them onto the table. Her posture straightened. She no longer looked like a frazzled librarian. She looked like a shark. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice crisp, "I am not a public defender. I am the chief legal counsel for Vance Global, and I have spent the last 2 months auditing Mr. Sterling's finances." She picked up a document. "Mr. Sterling claims full disclosure of assets," Sarah began. "However, on page 40 of the prenup, it states that if either party fails to disclose assets exceeding $50,000, the entire agreement is null and void." "I disclosed everything," Ethan yelled. "Did you?" Sarah held up a piece of paper. "What about the offshore account in the Cayman Islands holding $2.4 million, the account labeled consulting fees?" Ethan's face went grey. That's company reserves." "It's in your personal name, Ethan." Gabriel spoke for the first time. Her voice was steady. "You moved it 3 months ago, right before you asked for the divorce. You were hiding money from me." "Because he committed fraud," Julian interrupted. "The prenup is trash, which means, according to Washington state law, this is now a community property divorce. My sister is entitled to 50% of everything." "50% of nothing," Ethan spat, trying to salvage his ego. "The company is leveraged to the hilt. If you take half, the company collapses. I'll file for bankruptcy. You'll get nothing." Ethan smiled manically. "That's right," Sterling Dynamics is in debt. If you void the prenup, you inherit the debt too, Gabriel. Joke's on you." The courtroom went quiet. It seemed Ethan had played a suicide card. If he went down, he'd take her with him. Julian Vance started to laugh. It was a low, terrifying sound. He walked closer to Ethan, invading his personal space. "You really don't do your homework, do you, Ethan?" Julian said quietly. "Who do you think holds your debt?" Ethan blinked. "What?" "The bank loan you took out 4 years ago to expand," Julian listed. "The mezzanine financing from last year. The emergency credit line you tapped into last week to pay for your mistress's new condo." Jessica Thorne audibly gasped in the gallery. "All of those loans were sold on the secondary market," Julian explained, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Banks get nervous when they see a CEO making erratic decisions, like divorcing his stable wife for a 24-year-old assistant. They wanted to offload the risk." Julian leaned in, his face inches from Ethan. "So, I bought it." Ethan's knees buckled. He grabbed the table for support. "Vance Global now owns 85% of Sterling Dynamics' debt," Julian declared to the court. "And as of this morning, Mr. Sterling is in default of the covenants regarding moral turpitude and stable management. We are calling the loans." "You can't," Ethan whispered. "I can," Julian said, "and I have. Which means, effectively, Sterling Dynamics belongs to us." Julian turned to Gabriel. "Elle," he said gently, "do you want his company?" Gabriel stood up. She walked over to Ethan. He looked small now, defeated, a man in a suit that suddenly looked like a costume. "No," Gabriel said. "I don't want his company. I don't want his house. I don't want his money." She looked at the judge. "Your Honor, I want him to admit it." "Admit what?" Ethan rasped. "Admit that you didn't build this alone," Gabriel said. "Admit that when you were crying on the floor because the patent office rejected your first prototype, I was the one who rewrote the application. Admit that I made you." Ethan looked at the gallery. He looked at Jessica, who was already texting on her phone, likely calling an Uber to leave him. He looked at Arthur Blackwood, who was packing his briefcase, realizing he wasn't going to get paid. Ethan choked. "Louder," Julian commanded. "You helped," Ethan whispered. "I didn't help," Gabriel said. "I was the foundation, and you took a sledgehammer to it." She turned to Sarah. "Take the house, take the cars, take the liquid assets. He can keep the company, but only if Julian controls the board." "Done," Julian said. "And Ethan?" Gabriel added, turning back one last time. "Yes?" He looked hopeful, thinking she might show mercy. "I want the jewelry back. It's not a company asset. I bought those diamonds with my allowance from my father 10 years ago." She reached out her hand. With a shaking hand, Ethan undid the watch from his wrist. The Patek Philippe. "Not the watch," Gabriel said. "Keep it, so you can count the minutes until you're bankrupt." She turned and walked toward her brother. "Let's go, Julian. I'm hungry, and I'm tired of the smell in here." Julian wrapped an arm around her. As they walked toward the exit, the sea of people parted, but it wasn't over. As they reached the doors, Jessica Thorne jumped up. "Gabriel, wait!" Jessica cried out, running down the aisle. "I didn't know! He told me you were crazy! He told me!" Gabriel stopped. She looked at the young woman. She saw herself from 6 years ago. "He lied to you, Jessica," Gabriel said. "But you knew he was married. You made your choice." Gabriel pushed the doors open and walked out into the cold Seattle air, which suddenly felt incredibly warm. The rain outside the Superior Court of Washington didn't just fall. It felt like it was being driven into the pavement by a hammer. Ethan Sterling stood on the curb, the water soaking through the shoulders of his $5,000 Italian suit, turning the bespoke wool into a heavy, sodden mess. The courtroom doors had closed 10 minutes ago, but the sound of the gavel striking the wood still rang in his ears like a gunshot. Fraud. Malfeasance. Void. The words bounced around his skull, refusing to settle. He fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking so violently he dropped them into a puddle of motor oil and rainwater. As he bent to retrieve them, humiliatingly wiping the grime onto his trousers, he saw a pair of red-bottomed heels stop inches from his face. He looked up. Jessica Thorne was standing there under a large black umbrella. She wasn't offering to share it. She was looking at him with the clinical detachment of a biologist examining a dead frog. "Jess," Ethan breathed, straightening up. He forced a smile, though he knew it looked manic. "Thank God. Let's get to the car. We need to regroup. I need to call Arthur. There are appeals, there are loopholes. This judge is clearly biased. He's probably in Vance's pocket. We can spin this." Jessica didn't move. She tapped a perfectly manicured nail against the handle of her umbrella. "There is no we, Ethan. Not anymore." Ethan blinked, the rain dripping from his eyelashes. "What are you talking about? You're my partner. We're the future of Sterling Dynamics." "I was the future of a billionaire CEO," Jessica corrected, her voice cutting through the noise of the traffic. "I'm not the future of a man who just admitted to felony fraud on public record." "Do you have any idea what my inbox looks like right now? 3 recruiters just cancelled interviews. My LinkedIn is blowing up with hate mail. You've become radioactive, Ethan, and I don't do radiation." "I did this for you." Ethan stepped forward, his voice cracking. "I expedited the divorce for you. I bought you the condo. I leased the Porsche." Jessica let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "You leased the Porsche in the company's name, Ethan, which means Julian Vance owns it now." "And the condo? I checked the deed 10 minutes ago while you were crying to your lawyer. You put it in a trust controlled by Sterling Holdings. You never actually gave it to me." She shook her head, a look of genuine pity crossing her face. Not for him, but for herself, for having wasted time. "You're not a titan of industry, Ethan. You're just a con artist who ran out of road. Arthur Blackwood texted me. He's putting a lien on your personal accounts for unpaid billable hours. He says you're insolvent. It's a cash flow problem. It's temporary," Ethan screamed, not caring that people were staring. "I have millions in assets." "You have millions in debt," Jessica corrected. "And I have a flight to catch. I'm going to Dubai. I met a developer there last month. He's older, uglier, but his check's clear." A black SUV pulled up to the curb. It wasn't Ethan's driver. It was an Uber Black. "Jessica, please," Ethan whispered, grabbing the sleeve of her trench coat. "Don't leave me here, not like this. Everyone is watching." She looked at his hand on her coat as if it were a stain. She peeled his fingers off, one by one. "That's the point, Ethan," she said coldly. "Everyone is watching, and I need to be seen leaving the sinking ship before it goes under completely." She slid into the car. The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in his chest. As the car pulled away, the tires sprayed a fresh wave of dirty water over Ethan's legs, but he didn't even flinch. He just stood there, a king without a queen, shivering in the cold Seattle rain. Ethan couldn't go home. He knew if he went to the estate in Medina, he would be greeted by silence, or worse, Gabriel's absence. He needed to be somewhere where he was still Ethan Sterling, the genius, the boss. He drove his Audi R8, the only thing he physically still possessed, to the Obsidian, the city's most exclusive members-only club. This was his sanctuary. It was where he had closed the deal for his first IPO. It was where the bartenders knew his drink before he sat down. He walked up to the heavy oak doors, shaking the rain from his coat, trying to regain his swagger. Henri, the maitre d' who had served Ethan for a decade, was standing at the podium. Usually, Henri would rush forward to take his coat. Today, Henri stayed behind the podium, his face like stone. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling," Henri said. The tone was polite, but freezing. "Henri, Scotch, neat, and a private booth. I have calls to make," Ethan said, moving to brush past him. Henri stepped sideways, blocking the path. "I am afraid I cannot admit you tonight, sir." Ethan stopped. He felt a vein throb in his temple. "Excuse me. I'm a Platinum Founder member. I pay $50,000 a year for this membership." "Your membership was revoked via email 20 minutes ago," Henri said, keeping his voice low so the other guests wouldn't hear. "The Board of Governors has a strict policy regarding members who are under criminal investigation. They felt your presence would disrupt the atmosphere." "Criminal investigation?" Ethan hissed. "It's a divorce case, a civil matter." "I believe the phrase, securities fraud, was mentioned on the news, sir," Henri said, glancing at a TV screen in the bar area. Ethan looked over Henri's shoulder. On the large 4K screen above the bar, the news ticker was running red. His face was on the screen. It was a photo from 3 years ago, where he looked arrogant and untouchable. Next to it was a photo of Julian Vance, looking like the Grim Reaper. The patrons inside, men Ethan had played golf with, men he had invited to his wedding, were looking at him. They weren't waving. They were averting their eyes, sipping their drinks, creating a wall of social silence. "This is ridiculous," Ethan spat, reaching for his wallet. "I'm buying the bar a round. Put it on my black card." He slammed the heavy titanium American Express card onto the podium. Henri sighed, a sound of profound weariness. He picked up the card and swiped it through the terminal. The machine flashed a red light. Henri looked at the readout, then at Ethan. He didn't hand the card back. He dropped it into a slot under the counter. "The issuer has flagged the account, sir. I am instructed to retain the card." Ethan felt the floor tilting beneath him. That card was his lifeline. It was his identity. "Give it back," Ethan growled. "That's theft." "Please leave, Mr. Sterling," Henri said, signaling to 2 large security guards standing in the shadows. "Before we have to escort you." Ethan backed away. He looked at the warm, golden light of the club, the laughter, the clinking glasses, a world he had clawed his way into, a world that had just spat him out. He turned and ran back to his car. He sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He screamed, a primal, raw sound of rage that fogged up the windows. He had nowhere to go. He checked his phone. 7 missed calls from reporters, 0 calls from friends. He reclined the seat of the $200,000 sports car and closed his eyes. For the first time in 10 years, Ethan Sterling slept in his car. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a stiff neck and a plan. Denial is a powerful drug, and Ethan had overdosed on it. He pulled into the executive parking garage. His spot, reserved for CEO, was empty. He parked, feeling a flicker of relief. At least they hadn't painted over his name yet. He took the private elevator to the top floor. He straightened his tie in the reflection of the brass doors. He needed to look powerful. He needed to channel the energy that had built this company. The elevator doors pinged open. The 40th floor was usually a hive of activity, phones ringing, analysts shouting, the hum of commerce. Today, it was silent. The open plan office was packed, but no one was working. The entire staff, nearly 200 people, were standing in the center of the room. They weren't looking at their screens. They were looking at the large glass wall of Ethan's corner office. Inside the office, sitting at Ethan's desk, was Julian Vance. Julian wasn't alone. He was surrounded by a team of people Ethan didn't recognize. Men and women in severe grey suits, typing furiously on laptops that were plugged into Sterling servers. Ethan stormed through the bullpen. What is going on here? Why isn't anyone working? The sea of employees parted. Usually they moved out of fear. Today they moved out of curiosity. They wanted to see the crash. Chloe, the receptionist, stood near the door. She looked terrified, but she didn't step aside. "Get out of my way, Chloe," Ethan snapped. "She's following orders, Ethan," Julian's voice boomed. Julian pressed a button on the desk, activating the speaker system. His voice filled the entire floor. "Come in. We were just getting to the good part." Ethan pushed past Chloe and burst into his office. "You have no right to be in my chair. The bylaws state that a CEO can only be removed by a majority vote of the board." "Correct," Julian said calmly. He spun the chair around, Ethan's ergonomic leather throne, and at 8:00 a.m. this morning, the board voted, unanimously. Even your old college buddy, Greg, voted against you. Turns out, Greg doesn't like it when his stock options plummet by 40% in a single day. Julian picked up a stack of documents. "But we aren't here to talk about bylaws. We're here to talk about forensic accounting." Julian motioned to a woman standing next to him. She was sharp-featured, wearing glasses that looked like they could cut glass. "This is Ms. Lin. She's an auditor for the SEC. She's been very interested in your Creative Development Fund." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. That is a classified R&D budget." "Is it?" Ms. Lin spoke up, her voice dry and raspy. "Because according to these wire transfers, the Creative Development Fund paid for a villa in Tuscany, a $60,000 diamond necklace from Cartier, and a retainer for a divorce attorney named Arthur Blackwood." The staff outside the glass walls gasped. The intercom was still on. Everyone could hear. That's a clerical error," Ethan stammered. "I can explain. I intended to pay it back." "That's called embezzlement, Ethan," Julian said, standing up. He walked around the desk. He looked massive, towering over Ethan. "And we found the second set of books, the ones you kept on the encrypted drive in your safe, the ones that show Sterling Dynamics has been technically insolvent for 18 months. Julian leaned in close. "You've been running a Ponzi scheme, Ethan. You've been paying old investors with new debt, and you've been using my sister's credit rating to prop up the loans." "She's my wife," Ethan yelled. "Her assets are my assets." "Not anymore," Julian said. "Now she's your creditor, and I'm her collection agent." Julian turned to the glass wall, addressing the hundreds of employees watching. "Everyone, listen up," Julian said clearly. "Sterling Dynamics is under new management. Your jobs are safe. Your pensions are safe. Vance Global is capitalizing the payroll immediately." A murmur of relief swept through the room. Some people actually cheered. "However," Julian continued, pointing a finger at Ethan, "there is a tumor we need to cut out." 2 security guards, men Ethan had hired, men whose Christmas bonuses he had cancelled last year to pay for his car detailing, stepped into the office. "Frank," Ethan said, looking at the head of security. "Frank, escort this man out." Frank looked at Ethan. He looked at the way Ethan was sweating, the way his suit was wrinkled from sleeping in the car. "I take my orders from the CEO, Mr. Sterling," Frank said. He turned to Julian. "Sir?" "Remove him," Julian said. "And Frank, take his badge and his phone. It's company property." "No!" Ethan backed into the wall. "You can't take my phone. All my contacts are on there." "They aren't your contacts," Julian said. "They are company leads." Frank stepped forward and held out his hand. "Phone, sir, and the keys to the R8. The auditor says the lease is in default." Ethan stared at them. He was being stripped, layer by layer, the CEO title, the office, the phone, the car. With a trembling hand, he placed his phone and the car keys into Frank's palm. "Escort him out," Julian commanded, "and make sure he doesn't take so much as a stapler." The walk from the corner office to the elevator was the longest journey of Ethan's life. Frank held him by the elbow, not roughly, but with a firm grip that made it clear Ethan was now a prisoner, not a boss. He walked past the desks of people he had terrorized. He passed Sarah from marketing, whom he had made cry last week because the font on a presentation was too pedestrian. She was drinking coffee, watching him with a small, satisfied smile. He passed the junior developers he had forced to work 80-hour weeks without overtime. They weren't working now. They were holding up their phones, recording him. He could see the captions already. "You're all fired," Ethan shouted, his composure snapping. "I'll fire every single one of you when I get back." "Keep walking, sir," Frank said, tightening his grip. They reached the elevator. The doors opened. Frank shoved him inside. "Don't come back, Mr. Sterling," Frank said. "If you set foot on the property, we have orders to call the police for trespassing." The doors closed, cutting off the view of his former kingdom. Ethan stood in the mirrored box, alone. He looked at his reflection. He looked old. He looked small. The taxi ride to Medina cost Ethan his last $40 in cash. He had the driver drop him off at the gate of his estate. He punched the code into the keypad. Error. He tried again. Error. Damn it. He kicked the gate. It held firm. He had to climb over the perimeter fence, tearing his suit trousers on the wrought iron spikes. He landed in the mud on the other side. He limped up the long driveway. The house loomed ahead, a modern masterpiece of glass and steel, but something was wrong. There were trucks in the driveway, not moving trucks, police trucks, and a white van marked Asset Forfeiture Unit. Ethan ran toward the front door. "Hey, what are you doing? This is private property." A sheriff's deputy stepped out of the front door, holding a clipboard. "Ethan Sterling?" the deputy asked. "Yes. Tell these vultures to get out of my house." "This isn't your house, sir," the deputy said calmly. "We are executing a seizure order issued by the court this morning. The property and its contents have been seized to satisfy the judgment in Sterling versus Sterling, as well as pending liens from the IRS. "You can't take my things." Ethan tried to push past him. The deputy put a hand on his chest. "Sir, if you interfere, I will arrest you for obstruction." Ethan watched helplessly as men in jumpsuits carried out his life. There went his collection of vintage guitars. There went the painting he bought in Paris. There went the humidor filled with Cuban cigars. "Where is my wife?" Ethan demanded. "Where is Gabriel?" "Miss Vance is not on the premises," the deputy said, though her attorney was here earlier to oversee the inventory. Ethan walked around to the side of the house, peering through the living room window. The house was being gutted. It looked like a skeleton. He saw something on the floor of the patio. He walked over to it. It was a photo frame. The glass was cracked. It was a picture of him and Gabriel from their honeymoon in Bora Bora. They looked happy. He looked human. He picked it up. Behind the photo, tucked into the frame, was a note. It was written in elegant, looping cursive. Ethan looked down the driveway. Sure enough, sitting by the gate he had just climbed over, was a single cardboard box. He dropped the photo frame. It shattered completely on the stone patio. He walked back down the driveway, the rain soaking him to the bone. He reached the box. Inside were 3 suits, some shirts, and a pair of worn-out sneakers he used to wear when he went jogging, before he decided he was too important to jog. He sat down on the curb next to the box. He put his head in his hands. Far away, across the water on Bainbridge Island, the sun was breaking through the clouds, illuminating a small cottage where a woman was making tea, finally free. But on this side of the water, in the shadow of the mansion he no longer owned, the darkness was absolute. Ethan Sterling had wanted to be a king. Now he was just a man in the rain with a box of old clothes, realizing that the castle he built was made of sand and the tide had finally come in. While Ethan's world was contracting into a singularity of lawsuits and debt collectors, Gabriel's world was expanding. She refused to move into the Vance family estate. "I need to breathe my own air, Julian," she had told her brother. "I can't go from Ethan's cage to Dad's museum." Instead, she bought a small, sun-drenched cottage on Bainbridge Island. It wasn't grand. It had a leaky faucet and a garden that needed weeding, but it was hers. Every timber, every window, every rose bush belonged to her. For the first month, she did nothing but sleep and cry. She grieved not for Ethan, but for the 6 years of her life she had wasted trying to be small enough to fit into his pocket. She grieved for the girl who thought love meant silence, but by the 2nd month, the fog began to lift. Gabriel started writing again. Before she met Ethan, she had wanted to be a novelist. She had buried that dream when Ethan told her that writing was a hobby for bored housewives. Now, the words flowed out of her like water from a broken dam. She wrote about power. She wrote about betrayal. She wrote about a woman who cut off her own wings to please a man who couldn't fly, and how she grew them back. One afternoon, Julian visited. He arrived not in a helicopter, but on the public ferry, wearing jeans and a sweater. He looked younger, less like the titan of industry, and more like the brother she remembered playing tag with in the Hamptons. He sat on her porch, drinking iced tea. "You look good, Elle," he said. "You have color in your cheeks." "I feel good," Gabriel smiled, looking out at the sound. "I feel real." "The audit on Sterling Dynamics is finished," Julian said quietly. "It's bad, Elle. Ethan was cooking the books for years. He's looking at prison time. The SEC is involved." Gabriel took a sip of her tea. She waited for the pang of guilt, the urge to help him. It didn't come. "That's his journey, Julian," she said. "Not mine." "We're rebranding the company," Julian continued. "We're stripping the Sterling name. We're going to pivot the technology toward medical logistics, delivering vaccines to rural areas. It was your idea, wasn't it? Years ago. You mentioned it in one of your old notebooks, I found." Gabriel looked at him, surprised. "He told me it wasn't profitable." "He was wrong," Julian said. "It's going to save thousands of lives, and I want you on the board, not as a figurehead, as an advisor." Gabriel shook her head. "No corporate boards, Jules. That's your world." "Then what will you do?" "I'm starting a foundation," Gabriel said, her eyes lighting up. "I'm calling it the Chrysalis Fund. We're going to provide legal and financial aid to women trapped in financially abusive marriages. We're going to hire lawyers like Sarah Jenkins to fight for women who are told they are nobodies." Julian grinned. It was the same shark-like grin he used in business, but this time it was full of pride. "How much do you need?" he asked, reaching for his checkbook. Gabriel placed her hand over his. "Put the checkbook away, big brother. I have my divorce settlement. I have half of the liquid assets Ethan tried to hide. I'm funding this myself." 6 months later. The New Beginnings Gala was the social event of the season in Seattle. It was held at the Chihuly Garden and Glass Museum, a wonderland of color and light. The press was there in droves, but they weren't there for the usual celebrities. They were there for Gabriel Vance. She wore a gown of emerald green silk that draped over her body like water. She wore no diamonds, only a simple gold locket that had belonged to her mother. She moved through the crowd not with the timid shuffle of Mrs. Sterling, but with the grace of a woman who owns the ground she walks on. Sarah Jenkins was there, wearing a tuxedo, toasting with champagne. Julian was there, watching from the balcony like a proud sentry. Gabriel took the stage. The room hushed. 6 months ago, she began, her voice clear and strong into the microphone. I was told that my value was 0. I was told that without a man's name, I was nothing. Tonight, looking at this room, looking at the $3 million we have raised for the Chrysalis Fund, I can tell you this. Your value is not a number in a bank account. Your value is what you can build when the world tries to tear you down. Applause thundered. It was genuine. It was loud. As the applause died down and the music started, Gabriel walked off the stage. She needed a moment of air. She walked toward the side exit that led to the alleyway, wanting to breathe in the cool night air. She opened the door and stepped out. A man was standing there, near the dumpster, smoking a cigarette. He was wearing a waiter's uniform, white shirt, black pants, but it was ill-fitting and stained. He looked older, gaunt. His hair was thinning, and there were deep lines of bitterness etched around his mouth. He looked up as the door opened. It was Ethan. For a moment, time stopped. Ethan dropped the cigarette. He looked at Gabriel in her emerald gown, bathed in the golden light spilling from the venue. He looked at the woman who was once his wife, the woman he had discarded. He looked at his own hands, rough and red from washing dishes. He had been hired by the catering company under a false name because no reputable firm in the city would touch him pending his trial. Gabriel, he croaked. His voice was raspy. Gabriel looked at him. She didn't feel hate. She didn't feel fear. She felt nothing. He was just a ghost, a bad memory. "Hello, Ethan," she said politely. He took a step forward. "I heard about the fund. It's good work. Thank you. I'm going through a hard time, Elle," he said, his eyes darting around nervously. "The lawyers, they took everything. I'm living in a studio apartment in Tacoma. I'm working double shifts just to pay for a public defender." He looked at her with that old, manipulative glint in his eye. "I was thinking, maybe, for old times' sake, you could help me. Just a small loan, until I get back on my feet." Gabriel stared at him. The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, at rock bottom, he saw her as a resource, a tap to be turned on. She reached into her purse. Ethan's eyes lit up. He expected cash. He expected a check. Gabriel pulled out a small rectangular business card. She held it out to him. Ethan took it. He squinted at it in the dim light. The Chrysalis Fund. Legal aid for victims of financial abuse. "What is this?" Ethan asked, confused. "It's my card," Gabriel said. "If you ever find a partner who treats you the way you treated me, give them this card. We can help them escape you." She turned around, the emerald silk swirling around her ankles. "Gabriel," Ethan called out, desperation cracking his voice. "Gabriel, wait! I made you! You're nothing without me!" Gabriel paused at the door. She didn't turn back. "Goodbye, Ethan," she said softly. She stepped back into the light, back into the music, back into the warmth of the life she had built. The heavy metal door clicked shut behind her, leaving Ethan Sterling alone in the dark, in the rain, exactly where he belonged. Gabriel Vance's story isn't just a tale of revenge, it's a tale of reclamation. Ethan Sterling made the classic mistake of the arrogant. He confused silence for weakness and kindness for stupidity. He believed that value is determined by a bank balance and that people are disposable assets. But he learned the hard way that the wheel of fortune is always turning. The woman he threw away, became the architect of his downfall, not by becoming a monster like him, but by embracing the very strength he tried to suppress. In the end, Ethan was left with the hollow emptiness of his own greed, while Gabriel found true wealth, not in her family's money, but in her own resilience, her own voice, and her ability to lift others up. It serves as a timeless reminder. Be careful who you step on while climbing the ladder, because they might just be the one holding it up. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button, subscribe button, and ring the notification bell. Thanks for watching.